Hey everyone, this is Brooke Barton from Ceres. I want to welcome you to this webinar that we are co-hosting today with ICCR. And we're really pleased to have with us Rod Snyder, President of Field to Market, which, as many of you know, is a nonprofit organization working to advance continuous environmental improvement in the U.S. agricultural commodity space. And as part of our research here at Ceres and our engagement with food and beverage companies with many of you, we've been really looking at and very interested in how Field to Market is playing a role in helping to drive more impetus and demand for sustainability in U.S. commodity crops. They definitely are, I think, one of the most active organizations in the space right now, and we're really pleased to have Rod here to present and share with us about Field to Market, which will be really the kind of first half of our conversation today, and then we will have a lot of time available for questions and discussion, which I hope everyone will be quite active in engaging on. Just as a little bit of background on Rod. Rod was previously Public Policy Director for the National Corn Growers Association. He was also former President of the Young Democrats of America and Government Affairs Leader at CropLife America. So he has a very diverse background. We're really pleased to have him here. I want to also just remind folks that there is a webinar component to this call. If you have any problems accessing it, please be in touch with my colleague Siobhan Collins@ceres.org. We also have a line open for questions, so if you if you can help us manage the background noise, we'll ask everyone to mute themselves until you have a question. And you can also, of course, use the chat function if that's easier, if questions occur to you as we're going along, and we can try to intersperse those with the presentation. So with that, I want to just see if Nadira had any comments or introductory points you wanted to make before we launch in and head it over to Rod.
Thanks, Brooke. I think you covered all the main points, and we're grateful to have Rod on the line because, as Brooke mentioned, we've heard about Field to Market from several of the companies we engage with and often bring it up ourselves. So grateful, Rod, that you're with us. So we'll definitely let you take it away now.
Thanks so much for having me on this morning. I really have appreciated this opportunity. I think you guys have heard a little bit from Field to Market in the past. My predecessor, the interim chairman, Fred Lucky, I know had offered an update some time ago, but a lot has changed, particularly in 2014 over the last 8 or 10 months, that I think that there's some exciting things happening within the Field to Market effort that is going to make a big impact on U.S. agriculture. So I'm going to try to advance through the slides here. Is that working? Just to check.
Yep, you're all set.
Great. So Field to Market actually was founded 7 years ago. Just to give a little bit of background information, 2007, it was a project of the Keystone Center in Colorado. Initially just bringing together 10 or 12 organizations, a fairly small effort, but still a significant one at the beginning, to figure out how we were going to define and measure and communicate and ultimately catalyze sustainability in U.S. Commodity crop agriculture. Some of those, the early years were really spent a lot on metrics development, trying to figure out what are the types of things that we want to be measuring and quantifying when it comes to sustainability. But to step back even a little bit further, there were some drivers that really kind of initiated this conversation to begin with 7 years ago that I think are even more are relevant today. Some key members across the food and ag supply chain recognize that we have a pretty substantial challenge ahead of us as we're looking at feeding between 9 and 10 billion people by 2050. And that at the same time we're seeing climate change, really significant shifts in climate and volatile weather patterns, which is making agriculture all the more unpredictable and difficult at times. We're seeing a rising middle class across the world that is with some pretty substantial changes in diet, more proteins and meats. All of this is leading us to a point where we're actually having to double agricultural output by 2050 against these volatile weather patterns and climate change. So no small task. In fact, many would say it's one of the most significant challenges facing our generation. And so that is the backdrop, in addition to just some of the more kind of obvious interest points from consumers and brands and retailers. As younger shoppers want to know where their food is coming from. A lot of this really drove the conversation in the early years and continues to today. So what we saw in the last couple years that really began to elevate this even further was a number of major food and beverage companies and retailers actually setting sustainability targets of their own. Many of them are engaging, all of the companies on the screen right now, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Unilever, Walmart, are all part of the Field to Market effort. But in their own right, even beyond the multi-stakeholder engagement, they began setting sustainability targets, which I'm sure you're all aware of, whether it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 or water conservation, very specific engagements around fertilizer optimization that Walmart has announced, sustainable sourcing commitments. Many companies began establishing these very specific company-specific targets, which really also elevated the conversation across the ag supply chain, because then you began to see farmers really starting to pay attention to ultimately what their customers are seeking to accomplish within their value chains. So
Rod,
as I've already mentioned. Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question about the sustainability goals, Nadira? I wondered within Field to Market if there are discussions that encourage more companies to come up with sustainability goals.
Yeah, so most, if not all, of the companies that are already engaged in Field to Market are probably some of the leaders that have set targets. There may be some of the downstream companies that have not, but by and large, many of the leaders are already involved. I would say a big part of our efforts right now have been around member recruitment to get additional food companies and brands that may not be quite as out front as a Unilever or a Coca-Cola, to try to get them to the table so they can really be a part of the larger conversation, which could look like a couple things. It could be setting overall corporate sustainability targets. It could also be really beginning to develop a strategy to engage with their supply chain. So our membership recruitment efforts that are underway right now hopefully yield some of those results as we begin to add more and more companies to our roster of organizations that we're working with.
Great.
So yeah, so the next slide here is just a general overview, just a quick snapshot. Field to Market, just so you know, it's already been mentioned, but we are a 501c3 organization, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. This was a significant year for us because we actually left the Keystone Center. They still are engaged with us, but we now actually have full-time staff and an office in Washington, D.C. We're continuing to staff up, and we really are sort of positioning ourselves for a long-term strategic plan that involves an organization that is fully engaged in the supply chain for many years to come. I think that was a significant step for our board and our membership to take as we headed into 2014. Our members are divided into 4 sectors, which I'm going to show a quick snapshot of our membership right now. We have grower organizations such as the Farm Bureau, corn, soy, cotton, wheat, etc., all the farm groups. We have agribusiness companies such as Cargill, John Deere, Syngenta, Dow AgroSciences, etc. We have food and retail companies like I've already mentioned some of them, but Unilever, Kellogg's, McDonald's, Walmart, General Mills, Pepsi actually just joined, Brown-Forman, it's a liquor and spirits company, just joined, so a lot of growth in that sector. And then lastly, conservation environmental NGOs. So World Wildlife Fund, Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, American Farmland Trust, those types of organizations as well. So we have a governance structure that really achieves balance across those 4 sectors that allows us to have a real integrity in the process to ensure that no particular sector has any undue weight in the way that we're governing ourselves and coming to conclusions on a variety of different topics. So we're up to 67 member organizations right now, and that's growing. We were just at 50 at the beginning of the year, so we've seen almost 40% growth in 2014 alone.
Rod, this is Brooke.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about, and maybe you'll talk about this later, but I was wondering if you could just quickly list out for folks the commodities, the agricultural commodities you guys are focusing on through this effort.
Absolutely,
and I guess
yeah.
one question, my other question that relates to that is, what percentage of a sort of market demand do you think that the Field to Market membership actually represents right now?
Well, that's a great question. So right now, the crops that we are most actively focused on, and I will cover this as we go through the presentation, but this is a good point to talk about it. So we're looking at corn, soy, cotton, wheat, rice, and potatoes. Those 6 crops make up 250 million acres in the United States, which is by far the largest landmass when it comes to agriculture in the U.S. We're still running an assessment on, and our membership is changing all the time, so we don't have a good target right now on what the sort of the purchasing power or the market percentages are with what our current members, what percentage they're buying. We're still assessing that, but I can tell you that what they have concluded is that they have set a goal recently in the last month, and it was a unanimous decision to set a 20% target for these particular crops of engagement in the Field to Market Sustainability Program. So that means that out of that 250 million acres, their goal is to engage at least 50 million of those acres by 2020. So in the next 5 years, scaling up the program. So 50 million acres is no small task. It's also would be hard to call that a niche project. That's really getting into sort of a mainstream game changer type of an effort if you are able to get 50 million acres. And we will need to get additional members into the organization in order to achieve that. And we know that we need to particularly focus on not just the consumer packaged goods brands, but also looking at livestock and poultry, even potentially looking at biofuels for some of those crops to help us get to that 50 million target. But at least we now have sort of what the scope and the scale is that our membership wants to achieve. So the definition of sustainable agriculture that we use is meeting the needs of the present while improving the future generation to meet their own, the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. That's sort of kind of basic, but just to note, we do look at the traditional areas of environment, human health, social and economic well-being, and also looking at productivity to meet future food and fiber demands. Our bread and butter has been looking at environmental metrics, which I'll explain that as we continue to move forward. These are some really important guiding principles that I'm showing right now on the screen. I'm going to talk through each of them quickly, but I think they're all really salient and are really part of the foundation for why Field to Market has seen some growth and success in the last year or two. First is that the program does engage the full supply chain, so we've made sure that we have actual farmers and farm organizations in the room as we're talking about ag sustainability, because they're providing a certain level of practical feedback around what makes sense on the ground at a field level, because we can talk all we want at a national scale about metrics, but unless we can figure out a system that actually makes sense to a farmer at the most local level, we're not going to succeed. So that's been a really important piece of our program, is having producers in the room. We also have focused specifically on commodity crops with unique supply chain and traceability issues. So that we're not looking at fruits and vegetables and nuts. There's other programs and systems that are doing that by and large right now. We've chose these commodity crops because it's actually not very easy to track a kernel of corn from the time it's grown until it ends up in a box of cereal on a shelf somewhere. So we're actually trying to design a sustainability program and a system that allows companies to come at this from more of a mass balance and aggregated approach rather than a a strict identity preserved or a strict traceable system, which in commodity crops would be quite expensive and quite difficult, and may actually prove to be impossible unless you were to completely change the distribution chains for these crops. So that was an important distinction at the beginning as well. We've also committed to being science-based and outcomes-based. This basically just meaning that that we are not creating a prescriptive checklist of practices that farmers need to certify against in every situation. This is important because if you look across a diverse set of climates and growing conditions across the United States, not every practice may be achievable or feasible in every situation, nor may it yield a positive environmental outcome in every situation. So we wanted to build more of a scientific model against which we could measure continuous improvement and measure sustainability outcomes in a way that was more site-specific. And so this has been, I think, really a positive piece of our program. It's allowed us to have more credibility with farmers and also allowed us to get more quantitative data that is, in the long run, I think, more helpful for us understanding what the environmental impacts are from these crops. Continuing on, we're technology neutral, which means we've not been wading into some of the discussions around GMOs or organics. We probably would lose more than we would gain by getting involved in that. We really have looked at just what are the environmental outcomes around greenhouse gases, water, energy, things like that, that are within a farmer's control. No matter what type of production system they're using, can we measure that? Can we improve that and leave some of the technology conversations to other folks at a policy level? We have a commitment to individual grower data privacy. A lot of farmers wanting to make sure that their data doesn't fall into the hands of folks that they wouldn't want. So we really have a strong commitment to that piece. If we're going to do a quantitative outcomes-based approach to sustainability, it does take a lot of data in order to do that. And so we needed to ensure that producers felt comfortable sharing their information with Field to Market. We have an emphasis
Rod,
on continuous...
Can I interrupt for a second with a question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, anyone just pop in. That's no problem.
Thank you. And this is Marcella Pinella with Mercy Investments. And I apologize that I don't have the slides in front of me, but I just wanted to jump in when you were talking about GMOs. And, of course, you're not going to get into that debate right now, but I was just wondering, the recently added water quality indicator, with regards to impact, how is Field to Market working in this area? Could you tell us a little more?
Yeah, the water quality index in particular, and I can get into this a little bit as we go as well. It's actually directly taken from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Some of our metric areas and indicators are borrowed or lean heavily on USDA modeling tools that they have developed. Maybe about close to half of our metrics are built on that. The other half are things that we've developed internally. So the water quality index is actually the only piece of our tool that is not quantitative, because it's just been quite difficult to get a quantitative model on water quality as quickly as we wanted, and USDA doesn't really have anything yet that's ready for prime time either. So at the moment, it's a sliding scale that is able to sort of do a comparative analysis, benchmarking against other producers and averages, but it is more of a sort of a 0 to 100 scale rather than a specific quantitative outcome. And it does look at tillage, it looks at pesticide use, it looks at nutrient use, it looks at a variety of factors, conservation buffers, riparian buffers, issues like that would then provide a snapshot on an index of how a farmer is performing for water quality at the edge of field. That's basically what the USDA Water Quality Index, that's the information they're providing based on a variety of factors.
Okay, that's helpful. And so it's not necessarily that you're promoting the reduction of these, but just the responsible application of things like pesticides and fertilizers.
Yeah, so there, obviously the fertilizer rate is a very key piece of information that we collect, of course. But there are other factors that we're trying to consider as well. The timing of the fertilizer application, what the slope of the field is, where they're applying, a variety of different site-specific or timing issues that, as well as the form that they're using. We're trying to actually get more sophisticated with respect to certain fertilizer nutrient management practices that would have an environmental impact or benefit to get that built in. So we're spending time over the next year updating our metrics in order to ensure that best available science is being used. And that actually also would factor in for greenhouse gas emissions as well, because some of these practices would have an impact on greenhouse gases. So yes, the fertilizer rate and how much is being applied is clearly a major piece of information. It's not the only one.
Thanks.
No problem.
This is Christina Herman. I have a sort of a related question, and I think it might be a good time to ask it.
Sure.
So on the organic agriculture debate, and I understand you don't get into the debate, but I'm wondering, how do you look at things like soil health and just the ability, for instance, with water, some of us work a lot on water, soil that is organically farmed may be more porous, and it just has a different quality to it than other. And I'm not a farmer, so I'm not any expert on this. But my understanding is it holds more water in addition to containing more micronutrients. And I'm wondering, do you have any place within the farm to market guidelines that looks at things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, our soil metric is limited to 2 different factors, but we're actually working with a team to update that. So right now, we are looking at soil erosion and soil carbon. We are looking at how can Field to Market measure a more sophisticated soil health, a picture of soil health, which would include micronutrients. It would include the ability to retain moisture, some of these other issues that would be really important, actually would be really interesting and useful and valuable information for the farmer as well, because if you think about long-term sustainability of an agricultural operation and the ability to improve soils over time, that's of great interest to a producer. So I might just jump ahead to what I was going to talk about in a few minutes, but there are 3 areas within our metrics that in 2015 we're very focused on updating. One is our greenhouse gas metric to ensure we're using best science and any new science. Second is our water quality metric to see if we can move from a qualitative to a quantitative outcome with how we're measuring that. And then the third is this area of soil health to determine if we can move beyond just the erosion factor and the soil carbon index to look into a broader suite of soil health considerations. So that's on the menu for our 2015 scientific development work, and if we can get consensus on how to update those, I think that's going to be a really tremendous improvement to our calculator.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
And Rod, this is Siobhan. I just wanted to jump in here. I know one of our investors was unable to make the call today. He's actually doing a farm visit right now out of the country. He's trained as a soil scientist, and he was just wondering, kind of banking off this question, and it's great to hear that soil health is going to be one of your priority goals and focus areas. But for instance, it doesn't seem like Monsanto's Climate Corporation, which they seem to be very active members of Field to Market, is trying to help necessarily. So are there partnerships you're thinking of where they have strong data tools that you could make your assessment stronger?
Well, all of our metrics are built on publicly available, peer-reviewed research and data that we can then confidently build into our tool. So if folks at Monsanto or Climate Corp were to publish data or information that would be available to our entire membership that could be then integrated into our calculator, that would be of interest. But really, I mean, for the integrity and transparency of the program, if we're making decisions on updating the way that we're measuring or calculating these things, it's by and large exclusively coming from publicly available sources and peer-reviewed pieces of science and data and information. So just to be clear about the way that we maneuver these discussions, we do have some pretty important standards with respect to type of information that we're using in building the calculator. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Rod, I think it does. I mean, I think we've engaged Monsanto a little bit on our Ceres end about what if any of that data that relates to water quality in particular they could think about making public, but obviously the peer review would be a critical piece of it and the credibility. I guess the other kind of related underpinning to that question is just sort of the whether or not you guys are looking at beyond the field practices that, or beyond the field measures. For one of the things I think is very interesting and probably very challenging of the work you're doing is that some of these outcomes it's really positive to address them overall. It doesn't really matter where we are reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, which fields, which watersheds, we just need to do that. But obviously with water quality, you really want those outcomes, and also with water withdrawals, you want those outcomes driving in places where the risks and the impacts are big or more pronounced. So I'm just curious about how you are thinking about these outcomes in the context of landscapes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are right now. We have a goals and regional mapping work group that announced some goals within Field to Market just last month that the full membership endorsed, and they were really national in scale. And that was a starting point to talk about what can we accomplish collectively, directionally. What do we want to be seeing within the Field to Market's program and collective efforts. At the same time, they made a nod to USDA's Regional Conservation Partnership Program Critical Conservation Area Map that was published last year from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that includes some of the regional areas where there are critical conservation priorities. And so if there's a watershed that is stressed for nutrients, or if there's an area that has water scarcity, we're trying to get our members to link to that information so that if they're setting up sourcing projects in certain regions, that they know what the top priorities in those regions are. So if you're going to address sustainability in the Southwest, you really are going to need to focus on water use as a top priority. If you're going to be in the Great Lakes or Chesapeake Bay regions, you really do need to look at nutrient loading. So we're trying to provide some regional context to this work, but it was important to get, I think, the national goals established first, and then that some of the more localized watershed conversations can flow from that. So I think maybe some of what I'm going to talk about as we move forward might help to illuminate that discussion a little bit.
Great, yeah, full speed ahead. Sorry about all of our questions.
No problem. No, this is good. These are great questions. Let me just finish out the guiding principles here. The last few, one is just an emphasis on continuous improvement. So Field to Market has not established a threshold level that would be required for a particular field or farm, simply because of the diversity of where farmers are starting from, and also what the overall capability of a piece of land, what's possible in a particular piece of land. It got to be a little tenuous to think about how we set a threshold level that would be really relevant everywhere to everyone. And so I think that the membership in its wisdom really did identify that this concept of continuous improvement was most appropriate. How do we actually shift the entire curve and challenge all farmers to be thinking about ways in which they can be better with their environmental outcomes, improve efficiencies, reduce environmental impacts. And so this is an ongoing journey rather than a destination, and I think that has been an important concept as well. And then the last piece is really thinking about the value of a common sustainability framework. What brought a lot of the farm groups to the table and got them more serious and interested was the concern that a lot of different companies might actually, or were developing already, their own sustainability frameworks and questionnaires that may not be grounded in science. It may not have the type of grower input or industry discussions that Field to Market has had over the last 7 years. So they really push for how can we have a common sustainability framework that we're we have a bit of a standardized way in which we're measuring these things, and that data that's being collected could be utilized in many different downstream for many different downstream companies. This is a lot simpler and more palatable for a farmer than thinking about a number of 100-page questionnaires that might not make a lot of sense and quite frankly could be quite time-consuming. This data that's being collected from field to market ultimately could be used in a lot of different settings, which we hope is beneficial for the full supply chain. So that's just a bit of a background on the guiding principles that kind of got us to this point. Quickly, I'm going to mention that over the last 7 years, we've been really focused on 3 different sets of deliverables. The first is our National Indicators Report we published in 2009 and again in 2012, looking at and documenting overall national trends within these major 6 crops in U.S. agriculture, and again taking all publicly available data, running the methodologies that we had agreed upon to look at what those trends are. And those reports are available online on our website and have been cited frequently. They've been used in congressional hearings. They've been cited in the media. There's just a lot of, I think, really helpful information that provides a bit of a context, some context and a baseline for the discussion moving forward. And we will update that report periodically. I think 2016 will be the next time we update that report. And then secondly, we built a Fieldprint Calculator to take those national scale methodologies down to a field scale, and really did allow a farmer to begin to identify opportunities for improvement on their own land. And that Fieldprint Calculator is now we're working on its 3rd version, 3.0. Right now 2.0 exists on our website. It's a free tool that's web-based, and all of the projects that are ongoing out in across the United States right now are largely using that web-based interface for data collection and analysis. And then lastly is the supply chain projects. This is where we're seeing specific companies identifying sourcing regions where they're purchasing or obtaining various crops, and allowing those companies to use the Fieldprint Calculator and working with growers, cohorts of growers in those areas to begin to benchmark their value chains, and to also, again, determine are there opportunities for improvement, what kind of trends are you seeing over time. We're really encouraging companies to, when they set up these kinds of supply chain projects, to continue measuring at least for a 5-year period, if not longer, to really be able to understand what the trends over time are within their growing regions. And this is something that we're really scaling up, and that we think that it's going to be a big part of what 2015 looks like. And there, I'll just mention some examples of it in a moment, but there are a number of companies working all around the country in this way. A quick glance at the Fieldprint Calculator. It is an online educational tool that's increasingly being used more in a supply chain context, so it's not just really an educational tool, but also becoming an important part of sustainability reporting, quite frankly. We're looking at land use, soil conservation, soil carbon, water use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, and then also a biodiversity metric, which is nearly finished now. It's going to be integrated into the calculator in 2015, that looks at really habitat potential and if farmers are improving habitat on their land. These are the 8 areas that we are measuring. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago in response to the question, that soil carbon metric, really, hopefully in the next year we can flesh it out a little and actually turn it into more of a true soil health metric. This Fieldprint Calculator is allowing farmers to look at their own fields, their own performance over time, and also to compare against county, state, and national averages on the summary page. So this first page is really where a producer will go in and actually outline the field borders on their own farm. We have a very close working relationship with USDA. They're actually an ex officio member of Field to Market. We rely on them heavily, and so whenever a farmer selects a field, we actually then are able to access USDA's public databases with respect to soil types and slope and other local site-specific information. which then allows us to run the algorithms based on the other data points that the farmer is completing on the calculator. All of that local information then is really important in the final conclusion that we give back to the producer. That is the summary page that you're viewing now that is presented in a couple different forms that allows a grower to look at how their field compares against these other benchmarks and averages. Really the most useful information is after a farmer has been doing this for several years, they can really look at what their track record is over time and whether or not they're making progress, which is really the concept, the principle of continuous improvement that we're trying to achieve. We're of course looking at, in version 3.0 of the Fieldprint Calculator, whether or not there's better ways to present these findings and these conclusions. Are there are there things that would make more sense to a producer? So we're getting that kind of feedback right now to see if there's ways that we can update that. And then also the actual Fieldprint projects that I was mentioning that are taking place around the country. These are the states where we have active projects currently. They range from General Mills and Syngenta working on wheat in Idaho, Unilever and ADM working on soybeans for the soybean oil for their Hellmann's mayonnaise product. That's in Iowa. We've got Coca-Cola working in Michigan, the Cotton Council working in Louisiana. Just a number of projects. We're also looking at expanding. We have developed and approved metrics for barley, sugar beets, and in the process of also approving metrics for alfalfa. So we are not necessarily set on the 6 crops that we have currently. We really do want to allow farmers to complete their rotation so that as we get into the next version of the calculator, we have better sensitivities for how one crop year affects the next based on what was previously planted. And so that's something that we're updating and wanting to include in the next version, which means adding some additional crops into our portfolio. So now just as we sort of move into the portion of my presentation that's really about where we go from here and what is Field to Market trying to accomplish with building a true supply chain sustainability program and really trying to become the industry standard, the dominant approach to row crop sustainability in the United States. In 2014 and 2015, we are seeing some pretty significant developments. One, of course, is actually opening up a headquarters in Washington to begin to position ourselves for the future, be appropriately staffed. Another key development this year has been working on technology that would allow the program to scale. And I think this is, I can't understate overstate how important I think this is. We are developing an application program interface, an API that would allow the Fieldprint Calculator to be utilized in other farm management tools and softwares, so that if a farmer is collecting data through other programs on their farm, that we actually could embed the Fieldprint Calculator algorithms into those programs, into those tools that would allow for the sustainability assessments to be run within those systems. We would have some, obviously some version control and some other really strict standards to ensure that nothing could be altered with those algorithms. But at the same time, it would allow for farmers to get this information without having to re-enter data that they may already be collecting elsewhere. We've been hearing from producers all over the country that this type of an automated system would probably increase the scale significantly and would be a lower barrier to entry for farmers that may want to participate in this. So this has been part of our investment in 2014, and we actually hope to begin rolling this out with several different tools and interfaces beginning next year, and there's already a great interest in wanting to connect with us on this. And then 2 other points. We did just establish this 20% goal by 2020 of actually having that 50 million acres of production involved in Field to Market's program. And we're also, we recently this year joined as a subscriber to the ICCR Alliance, which I believe is based out of London, that is helping to provide a certain level of standardization and transparency and ensuring that everything that we're setting up with respect to a supply chain verification program meets certain internationally recognizable standards with respect to sustainability and different processes and protocols. So the ICL approach is new for us, but we do think it was necessary so that we actually had some connection to a larger body that would provide that guidance for us. In addition, just in June, Field to Market adopted a program framework for what we're calling this supply chain sustainability effort, this continuous improvement program that includes 3 basic functions that I think are really important to keep in mind. And this was adopted unanimously by our membership, these 67 organizations. There's 3 basic functions. The first is this benchmarking and data collection effort through the Fieldprint Calculator or through associated tools to really begin to get additional data into our system for purposes of benchmarking and also just getting farmers to get them to begin to run these assessments. The second is to identify opportunities for farmers for continuous improvement by leveraging existing tools and programs and initiatives. And it probably seems obvious to say, but Field to Market being a very small organization with not a lot of staff, we're not attempting to recreate the entire conservation delivery system in the United States. There are lots of folks, USDA, local offices, NRCS offices, certified crop advisors, state extension offices, conservation districts, lots of different partners all across the country that are already engaging with farmers on conservation issues all the time. And so what Field to Market is really committing to doing is how do we bring this sustainability conversation to the forefront and all of those other efforts, and how do we have the right type of information and materials and learnings to hand to these trusted advisors, these farmer-facing audiences. And so a lot of what we're doing in 2015 is making sure that the Fieldprint Calculator process is not happening in a vacuum, but is linking to these other programs and experts out in the landscape through material development or other means. The Certified Crop Advisor program, for example, is working with us on creating a sustainability specialization track for their CCAs. So if you are if you're a farmer that's working with a crop advisor, they now can actually, by next year, will be able to go and become certified in sustainability, and they will then be able to advise the producer on the types of things that we're measuring and the types of practice changes that a farmer might consider. We think these are really the strategies and approaches that help get this to scale and that really actually help make an impact in the long run, which is what we're trying to do on a larger scale. And then the last piece is number 3 is aggregating information to enable supply chain sustainability claims. This is a key driver in the Field to Market program. Many of these downstream companies want to be able to talk about what's happening in their value chains. They want to be able to help leverage and incentivize or drive improvement. And so we are looking at ways in which we can aggregate the data that we're collecting, be able to provide some sort of regional or sourcing region specificity for a company to talk about impacts and improvement that are occurring within their supply chains, and to do this in a verifiable, standardized way that with protocols that have been agreed upon across the Field to Market membership. So this is an important new development. It is something that we hope to have in place in the next 12 to 18 months. And so right now, if you were to ask me exactly the way in which a company can measure the impacts that they're having within their supply chain through a program like Field to Market, we don't have those protocols exactly finalized yet, but that's being agreed upon. The World Wildlife Fund and Unilever are actually co-chairing that verification work group and then leading the Field to Market membership through that discussion on how best to aggregate that data for purposes of reporting. I'll mostly skip over this except for to say, yeah.
Oh, Rod, could I just jump in, because I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the claims process. I know that that's probably a lot of interest to our listeners today, just given that we are as a group very interested in companies reporting the progress of their sustainable agriculture commitments and goals. And I just was wondering if you could give us a sense of some of the sorts of claims folks are thinking about. I mean, is it something to the degree of the corn we're sourcing is 20% less greenhouse gas intensive than it was 5 years ago, or how are people thinking about making these claims?
Yeah, that's a great question, and what you just the example you just gave is really what we're seeing most often. It's not about a specific. It's rarely have we seen examples of a specific product claim to the point where a company may be wanting to label, but more along the lines of what you just mentioned. They are setting certain reduction targets with respect to greenhouse gases or water use, those being the most prominent examples, but there are others as well. And they would want to be able to track and measure against those goals. And so over time, 2020 seems to be a really key year for most of these companies. By 2020, they actually want to be able to talk about what the reductions look like and to have a verifiable way to measure and report that. And so that's what that's really right now what we're sort of designing our system around is how to support those types of claims, which are really kind of often they're business-to-business reporting. You're seeing Walmart now with their sustainability index requiring their tier 1 suppliers to report these kinds of pieces of information that are very increasingly becoming quite quantitative. We are trying to be in a place where we can help companies access that information and also really be a part of that continuous improvement process within their value chain. So the example you gave of a greenhouse gas reduction within the corn that they're purchasing, that would be a pretty common goal.
Can I ask another question? This is Mary Beth, and thanks so much for this presentation. It's really helpful to get a better sense. I'm curious to know a little bit more about the Fieldprint Calculator. And is it to say that right now, does the calculator function to change behavior, or is it helping farmers understand what sustainability practices look like, or is it really just about collecting data? And then a follow-up question is, what is the response you're seeing from farmers that are being asked by companies to start using this? Are they excited about it, open to it, reluctant, just to get a better sense of the response?
Yeah, those are both great questions. So right now, the calculator, it's somewhere between a benchmarking tool and also attempting to be a change agent, not a decision support tool. So let me explain what that means. So when a farmer gets their scores back, there's enough information there to begin a conversation around what their practices are looking like in comparison to other benchmarks. And there's also enough there that they could go back in and actually do scenario analysis exercises where they could go in and actually tweak or change fertilizer application rates or tillage practices or whatever of these data points. And they can actually then look and see how does that change the outcome on their final summary. So they can actually run scenarios to determine. So you actually farmers can use this to begin to understand impacts a little better. We don't want to be the end-all, be-all decision support tool, though, because we think there are so many additional factors, whether it's economics or whether there's just a whole bunch of other issues that there are lots of folks that have invested heavily in that decision support space within the private sector as well as USDA. We want to be the beginning point for that conversation. So Field to Market is not right now in the business of making specific agronomic recommendations. We are trying to allow the farmer to benchmark, allow the farmer to think about other scenarios, and then work within their own current operations, working with their own trusted advisors to then really make the final decision about practice changes. They could reach those decisions using the Fieldprint Calculator alone, but more likely, just knowing farmers, they're going to reinforce that from other sources of information. So we hope that we're the starting point for the conversation. We're probably not the final decision. At the same time, what we're finding to answer your second question, culturally, this is not the easiest topic. Farmers are not super keen on having thinking about reporting to Walmart about the way that they're farming. You see a little bit of resistance around this, but there's an increasing awareness that consumers are interested in this information, that more and more downstream companies are requesting this. So at some point it just starts to become the way that you're doing business. And this is, as I'm spending a lot of time on the road in rural areas right now. I was in South Dakota and Illinois and Colorado all in the last week. And you're beginning to see a recognition that this is just now part of the way that the entire ag supply chain is moving, with greater visibility and transparency across the supply chain. So I think it's an evolution, it's a process. At the end of the day, my hope is that farmers will actually gain enough valuable information through the field printing process that it does spur ways in which they can think about innovation, efficiency improvements, and also profitability. And we want to actually start publishing some examples of farmers that have been using the field print process and have saved money either through reducing irrigation rates, modifying their nutrient management rates, their fertilizer application rates, things that they've done that have improved the environment and also improved their bottom line. Because I think that there are management improvements that actually allow a farmer to do well and do good at the same time. So that's a long answer to your question, but there's sort of a lot happening on the landscape right now that is changing this conversation ever so slowly into a more positive direction.
Rod,
and let me just, go ahead.
I had a question also about the footprint. This is Susan Baker at Trillium Asset Management. The tool, and thanks for describing some of the goals ahead in developing the biodiversity metric and building out the soil indicator as well. I guess my question is that in those indicators, will we also see more build out of pesticide use management? It seems to me that this tool has given little weight to pesticide use, all while there are other tools out there that are paying more attention to IPM programs, et cetera. So could you speak to that and how you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah, the two pieces that are most likely to get into this particular issue area of pesticide use would be if we're able to move to a more quantitative measure around water quality. And right now pesticides are factored into the water quality index, but it's just, it's a little more vague simply because it's not a quantitative outcome. So we are looking at, what are the impacts from pesticides if we move into a quantitative approach for water quality. And then also the biodiversity metric as it's being finalized and integrated. There are elements of pesticide applications that will be included in what are the impacts on biodiversity from chemicals. So those two indicators would both involve pesticide application considerations. Some folks have said, well, why don't you have a separate pesticide metric? And we push back on that a little simply because all of our metrics so far have been about measuring environmental impact. So I think we can do a better job of integrating pesticides into the existing indicators or talking about future indicators that may also include pesticides. But we've never wanted to have a snapshot of just fertilizer use or just pesticide use, because if you divorce that from the environmental outcome, it's not that useful of a conversation, because you don't always know what's happening there with respect to why certain management decisions were made, and and certain fields may actually be more sensitive with respect to pesticide applications than others based on soil type or proximity to a water, things like that. So yes, I agree. I think we can be making some modifications to account better for pesticide impacts. It would likely come in those particular indicators of water quality and biodiversity.
Thank you.
And which are, they're on the table for this coming year. So let me just close my last slide, and I know we only have 5 minutes left, but I was just going to highlight the key objectives for 2015. Most of them I'm now reiterating, but I think they're worth noting again. We are working to update the metrics to incorporate this newly available science, whether it's greenhouse gases, whether it's water use, water quality, soil health. Our metrics work group is working through all of that currently in a multi-stakeholder fashion with all of the NGOs and growers and companies together. Secondly, we are preparing for this rollout of version 3.0 of the calculator with the updated user interface and also this integration into other farm management software through an API. We are developing partnerships for continuous improvement, which includes working on sustainability curriculum with the crop advisors and other ways in which we're leveraging those existing networks already on the landscape. Fourth is establishing verification protocols for sustainable sourcing claims, really trying to get companies using a consistent format for how they're actually measuring and reporting these improvements. And then fifthly, looking at membership expansion to strengthen downstream pull. I'm spending a lot of time trying to talk to some of these sectors that are underrepresented within Field to Market right now. We know that if we have additional food companies, additional livestock and poultry sector entities and operations, as well as potentially even biofuel companies coming into this same framework, that you really do begin to signal to farmers that this is the standardized way in which we're going to be measuring sustainable outcomes. So that's really a big part of another part of our goal for 2015 as well. In addition to the science and programmatic improvements, is really expanding the number of folks who are using this approach. And so that's where we are. Our website is fieldtomarket.org. And you can actually access the Fieldprint Calculator there, as well as the national report and other pieces of information, such as our updated membership list, which is growing all the time. So, with that, I know we don't have a lot of time for questions, but we've been kind of working through questions throughout. So I'll just turn it back.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rod. This is great. So I want to ask you one question, and I know we have at least another question that's been put in that hasn't been addressed yet. One question I have, and again it comes from kind of knowing that this group of investors is very active in engaging companies around their sustainability goals and reporting, and I see that you have a couple of companies that have publicly committed to enrolling a certain number of acres through Field to Market. Is that a requirement of membership? Are you guys putting that onus to your members right now? Are there things that investors here can be doing on that score? If you could hold it out, and I'll raise the other question that we have from Nikea, who says, are you engaging programs at colleges and universities to align these concepts at the career levels? I'm in dialogue with Michigan State University and surprised how little communication is going on between organizations like yours and ours. So we have a student on the line, so I just wanted to put that out there, and we may have a couple of more questions that you probably can see as well. So so let me take both of those. So the first being, or the second being about the university engagement. We're having more land-grant universities in particular beginning to take an interest. So we just had the University of Tennessee join. We've talked to University of Nebraska. We've talked to Purdue. We haven't yet talked to Michigan State. We actually would like to see university engagement really increase. I think they're all still trying to figure out what role they can play. Part of it is just, some of the expertise with respect to metrics and some of these issues would be great to have their input. But even better than that would be to really, as you mentioned, getting out there to this next round of graduates that are coming into this space, understanding how we're talking about and measuring sustainability would be really key. So we are adding additional university partners, and there's really no limit on that for us. We are eager to have as many of those as possible, and if there's ways in which they can get it, if there's ways in which we can interface with them, or you'd like to suggest that, we're happy to reach out. As far as companies and the commitments they're making, we every year have asked companies to sort of make nominal commitments to what they're going to be doing in the next 12 months, just because we need to know. So there's not any specific commitment to membership around acreage right now, but we are really celebrating those companies that do set those. So right now, General Mills and Coca-Cola being two of the most specific examples of an acreage target. Unilever has been really active as well, although I don't know if they've set a specific target, but those are really some of the high-profile companies that are doing a great job right now of identifying within their own sourcing areas how much they think they need to get to in the next few years. We definitely would love to see investors encouraging that type of really specific targeting because it does make a big difference. It signals to the entire supply chain
that these companies take it seriously and that they're not just piloting, they're not just sitting at the table at Field to Market, but they really plan to use this as part of their sustainable sourcing strategies, and that is hugely important. So yes, we would clearly encourage that moving forward. And then I saw one question about on the feed here on the chat about social metrics. We, up to this point, have been really just exclusively focused on environmental outcomes. I don't know what the membership is going to do moving forward on some of these issues around worker safety and labor, some of these other things. It's obviously not outside the realm of possibility that we begin to integrate that. It's just not been the expertise of the team that really built this program. So I suspect that as the program gets greater visibility and more traction, there will be a desire to integrate social metrics into the process. We're already beginning to see that from some of the companies that are at the table already, is to say, well, this could be a one-stop shop for us with respect to not just environmental but also social. So it's not there right now. I don't have a time frame yet on what the membership wants to do on it, but it has been coming up recently, and I think it probably depends on the type of stakeholders that join. There may be some farm labor organizations or others, other NGOs that if they came into the Field to Market membership, they could really help with providing some expertise around the types of social metrics we may want to include in the future.
Great, thank you so much, Rod. So if you don't mind staying on for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, I know others might need to cut off at this point, so I want to thank everyone for joining. I know we do have one other set of questions from Christina Herman that's come in through the chat. Rod, do you see that, or are you able to address those questions?
Let's see, science-based greenhouse gas reductions is Field to Market coordinating with the World Resource Institute and others developing science-based goals. So our entire strategy right now around greenhouse gas reductions is working through publicly available data and through the organizations that are part of Field to Market right now. I have not had any recent conversations with WRI. I know they're doing some work in this space. I would really love input from WRI and engagement from WRI. Actually, I think they may in the early days have been a part of Field to Market, but are not here any longer. So, for those who have any relationships with WRI or other NGOs that you think are doing some important work in this space, we would be more than happy to link up with them. We clearly have a very intentional multi-stakeholder process of engaging across our full membership, but for whatever reason WRI is not engaged right now, so I think it could be beneficial to get them back at the table. We're obviously open to that. I think that was the question.
So thank you, Rod, and thank you for just, it's been wide-ranging. We've peppered you with a lot of questions. This group, as you know, is very, very interested in helping to advance the prioritization of these issues within the companies and their portfolios. So this has been incredibly educational, and I do hope our organizations can continue to build on this dialogue and find ways to support each other's goals. So thank you so much, and we will be sending around a link to the recorded webinar, and I'm sure we can share slides or other materials if there's interest in that. Just reach out to Siobhan or I. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Rod.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.